Darryll Stinson joins In the Calm. Daryll is an acclaimed two-time TEDx motivational speaker, best-selling author, former athlete, and the founder of Message to Movement. Daryll is here and shares his long rise to inspired living after a devastating injury ended his professional athlete career. Daryl's mental health hit a low, and he shares his story of overcoming multiple suicide attempts before learning how to make the decision to live in purpose. This episode is so incredibly inspiring and uplifting. Daryll is such a light and now sharing that motivation on stages around the world. We're going to deep dive into potentialities, quantum leaps, and the truth of what it takes to decide to live the life you're being called to live. Let's dive in. Welcome to In the Calm. I'm your host, Georgiana Alexander. Friend, I'm so glad you're here. It's so good to see your face.
Likewise.
Welcome, Daryll. Welcome. You're just such an inspiring person. I am so grateful that you are here to share this story, this light, this wisdom, all of the things in your incredible journey that you've been on. If you could start with a little bit of your origin story of kind of what got you into that Division I athlete place and then really set you off in your path.
Yeah, totally. So, I was like not the most popular kid kind of growing up. I grew up in Jackson, Michigan, which is like a small town about an hour west of Detroit. And so people think of it like a smaller Detroit. And,
Okay.
grew up in the hood, and there was a lot of like bullying going on. I used to get teased for being a black kid that talks and acts white. People thought I was a homosexual because of my affection. Not that, anything wrong with that if that's somebody's choice, but that was like not
That
what I
was just
was.
that
So
was the
I
space.
didn't
Yeah,
I,
that was
I didn't want to be viewed in that way, in that light. And so, what I'd learned is that sports was a way that I gained acceptance, was a way that I gained love. I was always tall. My dad was a really good athlete. He was actually supposed to play in the NFL, but blew out his knee. And
wow.
so I always had natural athletic skill. And the older I got, the better I got, the more involved I got, the better I got. And so, ultimately through hard work, through effort, through this driving force of like, hey, this is how I gain love. This is how I gain acceptance. This is how I gain, esteem, popularity. This is how I get girls. I just poured myself into sports and became a top 100 athlete. Was ranked 79th in the US and number 3 in the state, right behind a guy by the name of Draymond Green, who plays for the Golden State Warriors.
That's amazing.
And went to Central Michigan University on this full ride scholarship, had this huge ego, was like, I'm going to be the next Michael Jordan, the next Kobe Bryant. I'm a freaking Nate sports. And that dream came to a crushing crash when I say ruptured a disc, but I pinched a nerve in my back. And that should have been the end of it. I played on it so long that I had atrophy in my left leg, and it was going to go paralyzed if I didn't have emergency back surgery.
Wow.
So it was like this collide moment, sort of like what COVID did to people of like, hey, this just completely shattered my dream. It completely rerouted me, it completely sent me in a new direction. And I was unwilling to let it go. Like I didn't know who I was outside of sports. I say that sports wasn't just what I did, it was who I was. And so my identity was fused. I couldn't see facets of myself outside of that reality. So I begged the coaches, please let me come back and play this game. And they did. I signed a
Wow.
liability waiver and was able to rehabilitate my body within 6 months after a
How
back
old were
surgery.
you in this? Like this is
Oh God,
insane.
old age. I don't know. I was probably like, I don't know, 19,
Yeah.
19.
Okay.
But more importantly, for the audience, I was about a year or 3 away from actualizing my dream, away from being, it's so funny because being a Division I athlete on top 25 football program was like already like a top 2% thing to do. But it's not, when you want to be a professional, it's like I almost was there to the top 1%. And like, entrepreneurs are striving to get to that level. People in their career are striving to get to that level. Like we're all trying to get to this place that we feel like is a full expression and of all of our gifts and our talents. And I was almost there. I was almost there. And just like that, it got taken away.
Yeah. And that you had so much wrapped up in this. It wasn't just the dream of being a pro level athlete, because really at Division One you are already pro athlete, you know, and but taking it to the next level. And so having your love wrapped up in that, having your identity wrapped up, having your worth, that hits hard.
Harder.
That is like harder than anything, because especially at that age you didn't have the tools. You had the tools to drive forward. You didn't have the tools to go inward and be at peace with yourself.
I didn't know myself. I only saw
Mhm.
myself as an athlete. I saw myself for what I did and not for who I was on the inside. And not only was it my identity really fused and attached to the persona of an athlete, but it was also very fused with this girl that I was dating at the time, who I was completely in love with and thought I was going to marry. So, yeah. And I was living in the paradigm that communicating emotions was a sign of weakness. Like the whole like vulnerability
Mm,
is strength thing, like was not actually in my awareness. It was actually the opposite. Vulnerability meant weak, it meant pushover, it meant wimp, it meant you weren't a real man. And
mhm.
so, I didn't even know what to do with these emotions that I was feeling of like hopelessness, of like, who am I? Do people like me for who I am, or do they only like me for my gift? And I'm wrestling with all of these questions. And so I just suppressed it. And I tell people this, like the story this way, is I started taking opioids to be able to numb my pain, my physical pain, to play sports. Well, I did so. I earned a starting position where I was able to have some success on the field. I was always a former version of myself. And I always knew that it was not going to work out. Like I knew it, but I was still
You could
trying to
feel
hold
it.
on.
So you were
Exactly.
feeling that inner message, that inner calling, like, hey, this is not right for you. But you
Mm,
just weren't listening. It was shutting down.
exactly. And then I started to numb my emotional pain with the opioids.
Oh, wow.
So like it morphed to where now I'm not even taking this thing just so I can just, not feel pain while I play. Now
Hmm.
I'm taking this so that I can not feel emotional pain while I live. And that's where, a lot of were made, started selling drugs and, living just crazy for 2 years like that. Just kind of like this double life of like I'm an athlete and I'm a student. And then I'm like selling drugs and I'm suicidal and I'm just numbing this emotional pain. It was a tough season.
Yeah, that's a very tough season. I'm so proud of you that you made it through. You know, I kind of want to touch in on that too, because your story is so powerful, because you kept going and something bigger in your life was pushing you forward, right? But I want to talk about, like, now that you are fully embodying like your emotions and your thoughts, like now that you
Let's
can
go.
look back, I want to kind of know, because so many people, especially on the other side of COVID, have dealt with depression, have dealt with like seeing their dreams and their worlds and their lives crash down and kind of feeling lost about where to go. What did that look like for you from where you are now looking back? What did it feel like going down that rabbit hole and drain, and then what pulled you out? Like what was the point that really got you out
Oh,
besides the suicide? I mean, obviously, like,
yeah,
you're a survivor of multiple suicide attempts, but
totally.
looking back at it from this mindset.
Uh, I think I was in so much pain. Part of it was this for me. I was a very smart kid
Mm,
early in my life. Like I was in advanced calculus when I was in like eighth grade. And
I
when
get that. You're really smart now, so I can see that
oh
it's
shit,
carried
I don't know if I can do that now. Might have been smarter when I was in eighth grade. Like
through.
concussions and like all this stuff might have messed up that. But thank you. I appreciate the compliment. Part of the underlying wrestle, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, is like I had been out of alignment for so long. Around the eighth grade, I kind of like flipped identities. I started to be this jock. I started to like be this street persona. Like I'm the tough guy. I'm the drug dealer. I'm the jock. Like
Hmm.
versus like I'm the smart, the intellectual, the loving, like who I actually really was.
Who you are, yeah.
And I lived out of alignment with that for so long that I really lost sight of myself. I couldn't find who I was. I was like, I don't even know if this is my authentic laugh, if I actually like the music that I like, or if I just listen to it so long that I think that I like it. Like I am
Hmm.
lost. And there was a few times where specifically two stories. One, I fell asleep at a steering wheel because I was like, part of it is I was like living suicidal, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
was just drinking like a whole fifth of alcohol and I get in the car and drive and try to mix different substances to try to end it. And like I was just living very carelessly, hoping that I would just get shot or drive off the highway type of thing. And I fell asleep at the steering wheel for 5 minutes.
Wow.
Was texting, I text somebody, and then by the time I woke up, I saw that the scent was 5 minutes ago. And I knew that I had drove around some curves and stuff, and my car was driving completely straight.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. There was another time when
That is intervention
I know,
from a
right?
higher power.
I know,
Like,
right? But I didn't even think I was completely agnostic at the time. I just like I didn't definitely didn't identify with any religion, and I sure didn't like believe in God. I just felt like there was too much stuff going on in the world for there to be a God type of thing or higher power or anything outside of just I don't know, meaningless. I had a kind of warped mindset at the time.
mm-hmm.
And the other thing that happened is I swallowed a whole bottle of my oxycodones. And I not only did not get high from it, I didn't need, like, I say it this way, not only did I not die, I didn't get high. And so it was like I woke up from that experience and I wasn't in like a pool of vomit or anything. I just was fine. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't unplug, like, and
You're
so,
unstoppable, and I don't take that lightly, but I mean, you're
well,
unstoppable. Like there was a reason you
there
were
was a
being,
reason, and
yes.
I couldn't deny that. So part of the awakening was like those moments where I couldn't deny that those happened, right?
Mm.
And so with the underlying sense of like, hey, I have this desire to find myself, and death felt like an avenue, but so was searching and finding and aligning. And so ultimately the turning point was, I ended up in a psychiatric unit.
Okay, that will turn you around. Yeah. I
And
think I think a lot of us, especially that have lived boldly in life, like
yeah,
we've all been about a hairline away from these
totally.
experiences. So you ended up in the psych unit for what brought you into the psych unit.
It was an attempt. I had attempted to drive my vehicle off the side of the road into an oncoming
Okay.
highway. My mother convinced me in the middle of that, intuitively just felt something was off, called me in the middle of that, and talked me into coming to her. And was on this spree of like trying to kill myself through starvation. So I went from 275 pounds to 219 pounds in 4 weeks. And I was sick and I wasn't eating and I like could barely
Wow.
open my eyes because I was like crying so much they were swollen shut. And so I ended up my mom actually took me to the psychiatric care facility, which I didn't know I was there at the time. I thought I was at the hospital
Hmm.
because of my like physical sickness. I found out I was, getting ready to get admitted to the psych ward. Two things happened. I had a divine encounter. I had two people who never talked to each other come to me and say that I needed to say yes to God.
Wow.
And I ended up saying yes to him. And that depression that I was under for years, it fell off of me, like it melted off of me instantly. The second thing that happened is I actually got admitted up there. And then I saw my first counselor, did my first mindfulness exercise, did my first journal entry. And the other thing is I read Joyce Meyer's book, The Battlefield of the Mind. And in the
Wow.
back of that book, she has this 10 wilderness mentalities. So I started to see how it could affect my reality. And it was a huge wake up for me. Like, not only did I have faith now and enlightenment, but then I had like some tools that showed me that there was a different world out there for me to be a part of. And it began a huge journey of searching out what that is.
Mm. I have so many chills in your story. I just want to circle back on a couple of things. I mean, you have such a driving nature that you're like going a million miles an hour in your athletics pursuit, right? And then you switch that gear and you're going to go 100 miles an hour in the attempt of
Mm.
sitting. I'm laughing, but it's not a joke. I mean, I feel you, but now we can laugh about it because I'm like seeing this from a different perspective that you're on the other side. And it's like, you are so determined, right? Whatever you put your mind and energy to, and you just needed the tools to be able to find your way through. It feels like to me when you're telling this story that in that psych unit where you found this book and you had the intervention, there was the time and the space for you to feel that person that you were on the inside again too.
Mm,
And
mm,
that is like, it's like you could relax down into yourself. There was nobody watching you and no expectation
mm,
of you. You'd
mm,
already like,
mm.
there was nothing left to drop, to uphold.
Yeah. Well, my
Yeah.
girlfriend that left me and got engaged to another man because I wasn't going to the NFL. I
Oh
lost
man.
my career. I lost my physical health, which is a lot of where I got my esteem and my accomplishment because I was hiding
Mhm.
behind the abs and the arms and all that stuff. And I was only left with me.
Yeah.
And I found it and I found me. And I didn't have the consciousness to describe it that way at the time.
Right.
I just knew I found hope and purpose and a sense of inspiration.
Hmm.
Sense of inspiration. Like I was inspired enough to like go on a journey and like you said, 100 miles per hour towards what was at the time finding real purpose and meaning in life.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to kind of circle back and tell you a little quick story
Do it.
because talking about you falling asleep at the wheel for 5 minutes and the car is just driving itself, right? So, and I've talked about this and my community knows this, but I am a generational channel and intuitive and seer. So I'm seeing all this stuff happen, right? Like I'm seeing the angels daily in my life, and I've survived several near-death experiences and some pretty heinous car accidents too, where it's just like everybody would say, "You're supposed to be dead." And I'm like, yeah, I'm not ready to die. I've got things to do. And I
Right.
knew it. And that was what actually saved me in those moments was that conviction and that knowing and that surrender to what it was that my purpose was here, right? But so there was this one time I was, and you're living in Atlanta, you understand Atlanta. It was like on 75. So it's like a 5, 6 lane interstate traffic, right? For everybody
Uh-huh.
listening. At 5 o'clock, it was starting to rain. I was in a sports car. I was driving on the interstate, and I just happened to be in this window where there weren't transfer trucks. There's a ton of transfer trucks in Atlanta. And all of a sudden, the car in front of me hits a skid and starts spinning out. And my car hits the same skid and starts spinning out. And she and I are just spinning around each other on this interstate with massive amounts of like really fast speeding traffic all around us that nobody manages to hit us. And in that moment, we end up fine, like on the other side of the interstate of what we were driving, facing each other off the side bank. And we're just like,
Mm.
oh my God, what just happened? But in that moment, my angels said, let go of the wheel. Like, let go. We got it. In that moment, they're like, hey, let go of the wheel. And I'm like, all right, I've learned. Like, at this point, I'd already been off a cliff, almost died. So at this point, I listen, when I'm hearing them talk to me. And so they're like, hey, we've got the wheel. And they spun me around. And I'm seeing this woman and I spin around the interstates. I'm seeing the transfer trucks go past us. And so for you to wake up and say, I know I went around some curves. I mean, listen, somebody had your wheel. You were
Oh,
being
totally.
so
Yeah.
protected. That's amazing. So
Yeah.
that's just like so amazing for everyone listening. The things that we think are possible in the moment, like when you have that purpose and you have the intention, and somewhere inside of you, it's like that purpose was stronger and louder and lighter and brighter than you could touch in or see or understand. And it was the thing that was connecting you to motivate you out, to pull you out.
Mhm.
And sometimes to get there, everything has to fall apart for what we think we want in order to reach down and grab hold of what is for us.
Totally. 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 I love it, man. And what I've learned about just continue the process, because it's really just the like a death and a resurrection. Like it's
Hmm.
the old self and fading away and new self arising. It's evolution. It's like whatever vernacular people are like comfortable with. We're all describing the same thing, the end of one
Yeah.
version of ourselves, one life, and the beginning of a new. And like I've been through multiple versions of that. And I'm at this place where I'm like, you know what? I don't actually have to have crisis. I can actually choose evolution.
Mm. That's
And
huge.
it's been a shifter for me as of like the last like 18 months. I think previously it was always the crisis had to awaken me. Like the business had to start to feel misaligned for me to align. Like it's like the revenues had to drop for me to do something different. My life had to go to the point where I'm arguing every day with my wife till we finally go see a counselor. Like it's like Michael Beckwith says that, pain will push you till the vision pulls you.
Mm,
And there's a way for us to just get so connected to the vision of who we are, so connected to the vision of what we feel that we're here on the planet to do, that we don't actually need pain to push us into the vision. We can just choose to align to the vision and deal with the struggle, the challenge, the letting go that comes with that. But it's a
right.
lot easier when we choose vision than when we run away from pain.
Absolutely. Oh, and I love Michael Beckwith. Oh, what an amazing soul he is. I love that. And I think that that's something I've been working to lean into as well as I didn't necessarily need the pain or the struggle, but really, I've always seen my challenges as gifts, but really
Yes.
leaning into that so that I can just accept them, move through more gracefully, and then letting those moments of joy, even the small moments of joy, be the quantum leaps, right? Like it doesn't have to
Mm,
be these huge leaps. It's in our everyday rituals, it's in our everyday joy and simple
mm,
actions and in the breath we
mhm.
take that those are actually are big leaps and we don't even recognize them sometimes.
Yes. So good. There's a,
Yes.
there's a lot there. I don't know if like people will catch that.
They're gonna catch
Like the
that.
small
Yeah.
doors and the quantum leaps is a really big deal. It's
Yeah.
a really big deal. Like the way I describe it to audiences sometimes who are new. I think your audience feels like they're like already all
Listen,
about
we're going deep here. We're saying
it.
all the things because
but but
this this community gets it.
they get it, right? But I still like some early language, so I'll use like like I was an elite athlete, obviously, and there came this point of time where it was like I wasn't learning like pages and pages of notes about how to like get better in my craft. It was minor tweaks that made major differences in my life, right? It was me bending my elbow in a little bit more if I was shooting a shot. It was me shifting the weight just a little bit more to the back so I can spring faster out in my stance. Like there
Mm,
was these minor things that made major differences. Okay. So we understand that from a physical standpoint. From a consciousness standpoint and a quantum standpoint, these micro shifts actually become gateways to new realities.
yes. Yes.
you know
Yes, we are on the same page, my friend.
And it's like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy because I can just literally have a lot of times we just think like, oh, I've got to grind it out or I've got to build it progressively. I went from 10K months to 20K months to 30K months, but you can actually go from 10K to 100K.
Hmm.
Like you can actually go from 5K to 500K
Yeah.
with a micro tweak. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh my gosh, it becomes quite the game when you figure out like, man, what is it that maybe that's small that I'm undervaluing?
I
Uh,
love that. I love that. And also, the thing that I'm recognizing is because I've been dabbling in sort of the more mass mentality. Like, I wanted to understand where people were coming from. So I took time
Likewise.
to be in that space. And
Yeah.
I feel so shut down. I feel so blocked. I feel so limited. I'm like, why? But why do I have to go from step A to B to C to D? I'm like, that's not how it works. Like, this isn't the answer. And my whole life, like even to speak to what you were saying as an athlete, so I noticed that as a performer, as a singer, where I was being trained, like I had grown up singing and performing, and then I went back in my later 20s and was like, I want to see if I can sing again. And my vocal coach was like, you've got a long way to go to get back to where you were. I'm like, oh, okay. So then what I did is I went and worked on the emotional and energetics of myself and realized where my blocks were. And then I'd walk in the next week. She's like, wait, how did you do that? How did
Mm,
you shift like that? And I'm like,
mhm.
well, I'm not trying to go somewhere. I'm trying to be who I am.
Come on
Right.
now. Ah, it's so
Right.
good.
And so
Yeah.
we just let go. And then it's different. So a lot of times with these steps that people think that we have to take to get from A to wherever the goal is, we're so holding ourselves back and limiting the potential because we're not
Mm.
being open to the truth of the way the world exists.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. And honestly, if people could just like really rest into that and go, okay, I'm not trying to get to something. I'm actually trying to surrender to something, or I'm actually trying to just allow something to flow through me so that I
Mhm.
can see these minor tweaks within my energy or my consciousness or my awareness that can make major differences in my life and they can open up new realities and possibilities. Okay, what is that for me?
Yeah.
And where is it? What gifts am I not allowing to be
Mm.
expressed? What personality traits am I not allowing myself to more consistently display? Where am I blocking myself? Where do I feel stagnant? Okay. There's a huge wave of people all in the somatics and all that stuff, right? And I think it's a great avenue, huge point of service. Part of what that does for me is it's easier sometimes to start with where it lives in the body
Mhm.
because stuff will live in our cellular memory. So if I can identify where there's rigidity in my body, where there's pain in my body, and ask myself, where is that coming from? When did I first feel this? What is this rigidness about? What is this tightness about? We can kind of trace it back and, oh, well, it's the time where I got made fun of in front of everybody for being who I was. And they said that I was too much, or they said that I was too much of an A personality, or that I was too shy, or whatever that is. And that's where a part of myself got cut off. And it's been showing up in my body somatically as an injury, as a tightness of back, as a knee pain. So there's different ways we can access it. But the point is to really sit with it. Because if I can gain greater levels of awareness to where I've been blocked, to where I've been withholding, all I have to do is really open that up, surrender to that, allow that, express that. And now, guess what happens? I receive what I believe is my divine inheritance. I align to all that is and the abundance that is
Mhm.
available to all of us because I am in congruency with myself.
I'm just dropping the mic right now. Like, there's nothing. We're done with this conversation. That was great. Thank you.
Oh
That was
man.
so beautifully said. And I love it that you brought that back to the somatic place because I'm kind of the reverse in my life. I see it as the energetics, and I'm looking out in the world and seeing what is showing up in my life that doesn't feel anything at all like who I am. Like, why would I be creating this in my life if it's not in alignment for who I am? And then I start
Mm.
doing the energetic tweaks and the shadow work and the healing and the deeper uncovering of things. But and there are definitely times because I'm so out of body or so, just like in flow, floating around the universe. And I'm like, what? I have a body? This is so cool. Um,
I get it. I get
so
it.
I love your perspective of that coming from the body and then also seeing it from the place that I've come from, which is in seeing like how the world is being shown and reflected in front of me. What
Totally.
am I being shown? It's so cool for everyone listening to be able to understand like however you're feeling it within yourself, like whatever feels natural, just
Yeah.
find your alignment. Like that's it. That's
Yes.
the key to everything is finding
Everything.
that alignment. It's
Mm.
incredible.
I actually, you brought up something for me because I'm actually more like what you said, right? And I was thinking, like, why has the body been a powerful tool for me if I'm more like what you described? I think some of it is I'm newer to some of the language around it and the understanding around all the energies and things like that. But I think a bigger piece for me is that, like, the word you used it at the beginning of this episode of like embodied,
Hmm.
right? And I think about like part of it is like when I was just in the astral planes, just floating around the ethers, is that like I wasn't actually embodied. Like, so I might have had an
Yeah.
insight or I might have been like, oh, here's where it's at. But the way that I was just like correcting that is like, I'm just gonna float to the next reality. I'm just gonna keep like floating around. And it's like, no, you're like you have a body, a human body for a reason to affect change. Here's what I wanted to say on this plane
Yes.
on this plane because I think there's a ton of people who are so spiritually minded that they're no earthly good.
Oh,
And how do we be spiritually minded and earthly good? Like we're
live
here
here.
on
We
earth
get to
for
live
a
here.
reason.
I know.
Like I love that you can levitate and I love that you can move energy and I love that you can flow and I love that you have insights and angels and visitations and all these things. But can you actually make an impact on this plane?
Yes.
And that's what I'm
So
about.
good. So good. That's such an incredible point, and I agree with you because I think that I love that you said that you didn't necessarily have the language Because to be honest, I didn't have the English language to describe my life. It's like there's so much new awakening of this language that sometimes people will say things and I'm like, what are you saying? Like, what is that? And then I'm like, oh, I've been doing that forever. Oh, you're just calling it
Yeah.
this. Oh, okay, okay, okay.
Mhm.
And so going into that trust of what your knowledge base is, but there is so much newness of people. We need to ascend. We need to elevate the spiritual plane. And I love that because that's what we all feel we are here to do is make impact, right? But
Right.
we're here to live and enjoy our life and have fun. And by even breathing and existing in the truth of who we are, that's what shifts our physical plane. And that's where we get to show up and dance and have the most fun in life. Oh, this
Oh,
is
so
so good.
good.
So good. Okay. I want to ask you some questions. Now you're a 3-time TEDx talker. You're coming on stage with Magic Johnson
Yep.
next month. I mean,
Yep.
achieved all of these things. Again, I mean, we're not surprised, right? Because you are the ultimate achiever, but from the heart. And I love seeing this. I love seeing you show up from the heart and in achievement. How did you go from finding that alignment into now you're this incredible motivational speaker? You share your story and you also help others find their story and
Yep.
their purpose and vision.
Yep. So we have to master a skill, right? We got to master some stuff. We just can't be jack of all trades, masters of none. So a lot of people like I'm this and this and this and this, and they say when I hear people list off too much of this and that and too many, like it's like, oh, okay, you're really just trying to find, it. So I went through that. It's all good, no shame. Went through purpose, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to figure out who I was and leadership experiences and coaches and all these things. And then I was like, okay, it's speaking. All right, it is speaking. I knew it was speaking this whole time, but I've been running, trying to find it different ways. Okay, I know that. So now I got to get better at the thing that I suck at. Okay, so how do I get better? And if people keep giving me this feedback, or life and God keeps giving me this feedback, what is it about the natural ability that I have that I don't see? So yeah, there was a level of like, I don't even know how to put a story structure together. I don't even know how to like book a stage. But what I did have was emotional depth. What I did have was a natural skill to connect with people. So how do I grow my strengths and guard my weaknesses? Okay, guard them. I don't have to grow my weaknesses because I'm not going to be perfect in all areas. I just have to guard them through systems, through people, through different ways of, being in my craft that doesn't let the weakness cause me not to operate in greatness. Okay. So I started that journey. Okay. David Meltzer, one of my mentors, taught me, Daryll, if you want to get to anywhere in life, the fastest way to get there is to find someone who's successful at what you're doing and ask for directions. Okay, so I started to do that, and Eric Thomas and Bishop T.D. Jakes and John C. Maxwell. And this asked all these people, how do you communicate? How did you build your business? How do you find your voice? What is your style? How did you stop mimicking and sounding like, other versions of your mentors? Like whenever I talk, I feel like I sound a little bit too much like Bishop Jakes or my pastor or whoever it was that I was like predominantly listening to at the time. And I really couldn't find my own voice. And so there was a journey of like finding what that was, getting on stages, pushing my edge of vulnerability, my edge of creativity, my edge of full embodied personality, and just getting comfortable with that. Right. It sounds good to be like, oh, I want to be my full self on stage. It's another thing when you're like trying to be your full self and the audience is like not feeling you and you're feeling those emotions of
And you feel it.
rejection.
And
You know what I'm saying?
you
Like,
feel it.
we
Yeah.
feel it, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, man, so I had to get comfortable with that, learn storytelling. And then it just, I did the TEDx talk. It got 2 million views, which is, TEDx talk alone is like a really big accomplishment. 2 million
Yeah.
views is like rare.
That's amazing.
And so it's like, oh, that opened up more doors to be able to speak in more venues and places that I wouldn't have gotten had I not had that asset, had I not had that visibility, that brand awareness. And just like really playing that game of like, man, where can I make an impact? And how can I do this in a way where this is like my core belief in the work that I do today? How can I speak in a way that doesn't just impact the audience, but it impacts the speaker? When there is alignment in your message and it's so congruent, like it's congruent with the service that's in your heart and with the expression that there is for you, like it will impact you and them because you're a channel,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
everything
Yes.
that you're giving out, you're also receiving.
Yes.
And it's just like, oh, snap. Oh, snap. Who's this for? The audience or me? It's for all of us. And that's what makes it fun. And so to be able to do that, to do the multiple TEDx talks, to help other people achieve that milestone for themselves and gain that global visibility of 37 million people and do it in a way that's like world class and take that skill and grow their causes and grow their missions. Like that's what I'm about now. Because if you really examine my story, it is the place where I was the most wounded. It was when I was being myself, remember? Being teased as
Mm-hmm.
the black kid that talks
That's
in
you.
that
That was you.
quiet,
Yeah,
being
that's
too
you.
emotional, like all these things that I was rejected for were the very things that I was supposed to embody and be compensated well for. I just didn't know that as a child, but I know that now. So that's what life is about. And so all these stages are a reflection of that alignment to be able to share the stage with not just Magic Johnson, which by the way, he grew up 30 minutes from my hometown. So it's really
That's
cool.
crazy. That's so
I know.
cool.
It's really cool. David Meltzer, Brian Hess, Tony D. Silvestra. I mean, these are people who are multi millionaires. And yet, not all of them are speakers, and I am. And I'm bringing the heat, baby. So I love that we're recording this beforehand because I'm talking myself into greater levels of
We're all
preparation.
cheering. Yeah, I'm
Because I
cheering you
gotta
on right
bring it
now.
now. I don't want to be like, how did it go? Oh, it sucked. Like I bombed it, like I want to crush it.
I'm
And I
holding
will.
you accountable. I'm like, I know you rocked it, right? Because there's no other possibility here. That's
Totally.
already happened in the quantum reality. You've already rocked it, and now you're just bringing that to you. You're
There we
leaving
go.
it
There we
there.
go. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to circle back to something that you said. There's so many amazing things
I know.
that you brought to life, but the word "to."
Mm,
I've noticed that you've said that a lot. I was to this, I was to
mm,
that. And it
mm,
was in the twos, too
mm,
much of, too little of, to this, to that, that you found yourself. And I
mm.
feel that too. I think many people can relate to that.
Oh
Is
yeah.
dim ourselves with the quote unquote twos, you know?
Oh yeah, so good. I honestly, what's coming up for me is there's this thing I used to try to communicate this point for at least 2 years, and I gave up because I couldn't find the words or the illustration for it. So this might sound like a terrible example, but I was trying to talk about our own uniqueness.
Mhm.
Like you probably heard it said, like, hey, no one will ever have your fingerprint out of the billions of humans that will ever be and ever will be. Like, no one will have your exact fingerprint or your exact DNA. Okay, that's how unique you are. And I feel like that's what it means to be in divine expression is to be as unique as your fingerprint. And all the places where society tried to mold you and shape you, like you actually just see it for what it is and you are in full expression of self. So when you're there, okay, there will always be a contrast. All right. And the way that I was trying to describe this with people
This
is
is so good. And I'm so glad you're going into them, like having to sit on my hands, like, okay.
And so it's like I said it like this. I said it'll feel like oil and water in the same jar. And a lot of times when we see that, it's like, oh no, something's wrong with me or something's wrong with them. And reality, what's happening is they're just in uniqueness and they're in uniqueness, and all you're feeling is oil meeting water. Now, they can operate, do stuff together in different recipes, but if you put them in the same container, they're going to clash. And I think if we leaned into the clashes, I think if we leaned into the places where people say we're too much this, too much that, if we
Mhm.
lean into what I said in my TED talk, was the places where we've been rejected, behind that rejection, on the other side of what you're to this, is divine expression, is unique personality, is the path for you. Like it is the key to who you are because you know it's there because there's that rub.
Mhm.
So it's not the perfect poetic saying, but I hope we catch the nuances of what I'm saying. Because I think it's a really big piece because from my experience, more people identify with pain than they do with purpose. If I ask people what their purpose is, I mean, sometimes I get good answers and sometimes I get confused answers. But when
Mhm.
I tell people, where have you experienced pain? They got clear answers, vivid recollections. Okay. And so if I can go to pain and flip it on the other side and go, hey, where was their purpose on the other side of that pain? Where was their
Mhm.
guidance on the other side of that pain? Where was their lessons on the other side of that pain? Where was their clues to who I really am on the other side of that pain? I feel like it's a gateway for people. I gotta go through hell to get to heaven. I don't know how you.
Yes. I feel this, and I was just in a conversation about this yesterday, actually, with a friend of mine, that we feel the challenges and we associate that to that. And you and I were just talking about that earlier, that you feel the challenges and you feel like that's what you have to identify to. So if pain is the
Mhm.
only gateway that you can find to figure out your purpose, to look at the clues because that's where the clarity lies,
Mhm.
then use the tools that you have, right? And then
Yes.
on the other side of that, step into the awareness of looking at, oh, it didn't have to be painful. What I was talking with this friend about was a lot of the painful challenges in my life that I've gone through. It was interesting because in looking back and even in the moments of those experiences, I had this inkling on the inside that they were there for purpose, that they were there to show me something. But it wasn't that I needed the pain to be the purpose. It was that I needed that pain to recognize I already had the answer inside that actually could have prevented the pain,
Oh
right? I
yeah.
didn't actually need that challenge. I could have just honored within myself what the easier path could have potentially been.
Totally.
And so, yeah, we can use what we have to find the pieces of what's showing us where we are. And I love that you said the oil and water in contrast, because how many of us daily try to avoid any of that contrast? We people please, we diminish ourselves, we only go into environments and situations that feel safe
Mm.
and with other water or other oil, right?
Mm.
We separate ourselves from those contrasting experiences when being okay with that rub and that resistance. Actually, at first it feels like that resistance, but then as you step into it and get comfortable, as you expand, you start to recognize the beauty in that and it starts to feel normalized and comfortable. So just like anything else, like going to the gym for the first time when you haven't been to the gym in a while or ever, at first it's going to be extremely painful. You're going to like want to
Mm.
run out of there. You're going to feel uncomfortable. And I think that's what came to me as you were saying these words is like most of us avoid the contrast. And those of
Yes.
us that really light up into our purpose and our alignment,
Yes.
ones that push past anyway until we learn to enjoy it.
Hmm. So good. So so good. People need like an application guy. There's a lot of keys, a lot of quantum leaps in this conversation.
Yes. There are. Everybody's going to leap today. Everybody's getting the leap vibes.
Yeah, so good. You're so powerful.
Thank you. I see you too. We see this in each other, right?
Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
so grateful for that. And it's just an incredible experience when you meet people in your life that can see you. And I hope that that's what this community is for everyone out there listening is like a place where they can feel seen and recognized and then feel validated in those journeys, even if they don't have that surrounding them. So for
Yeah,
everyone listening, we love you and we see you too.
totally.
um,
Totally.
so you are on these stages with not only yourself being incredibly accomplished and you've reached these goals and you're finding new strides in what you do, but on stages with people who externally seem so accomplished and they are so accomplished.
Hmm.
But no matter what level of life someone has reached, we all have our insecurities. We all have our fears. We all reach these places of imposter syndrome. So I know a lot of people listening may be like, oh, that's great for you, Daryll, because of X, Y, and Z. But so I know
Such
you
a good
coach
question.
people. Yes.
Yeah.
I know you coach people and work with people in this realm, as well as you see this in your friend circle. How do
Mhm.
you face the imposter syndrome that shows up?
Mm. That's so good. That's so good. I want to answer the question, but there's something that's like blocking my mind because I'm like stuck on it. So I'm going to address it. So please help me not to forget if possible.
No,
But
go back
there,
into
there, was-
whatever you want to address.
well, there was this thing that we were talking about of being like so spiritually minded that you're no earthly good. And I think it's a really big piece. And part of why I wanted to resurface is because I do think that there's a remnant of folks right now, and really it's a growing number of people that are really diving into spirituality.
Hmm.
And so beautiful to see and so beautiful to watch. And one of the things that happens is you pick up quantums of information. okay, insight, new information, downloads. And when you skip from reality, one of the things that can be challenging in being earthly good is how do I take, you can call it a millennium of wisdom and
Mhm.
put it in a podcast. Like, how do I take a millennium
My daily struggle. How do
and
I
put it in a
communicate
social
my
media
life?
post,
Yes.
like how in the
How
world
do you
does,
bring this
how do
into
you transfer it?
context?
Yeah.
How can you bring the consciousness of the universe that we all infinitely
Yes.
are and distill
Yes.
it into earthly good?
Yes. And so I think one of the reasons why that question kind of like was like, okay, address this first, Daryl, is because that is part of the work and that is part of the solving the imposter syndrome. Number one, in order to solve it, you have to get specific about why do you feel like an imposter? What people try to fix imposter syndrome through affirmations, right?
Mhm.
Like, okay, I belong, I'm enough. And like they think that's just going to reconcile it. I think it actually bypasses it. And I think it's short lived. But if you don't actually reconcile what it is, and the way that you reconcile is you have to name it. You have to say, why do I feel like an imposter? Is it because of my financial level of success? Is it because of my skill within speaking in this instance? Is it because of my wardrobe that I feel like an imposter? And maybe like I don't look the part? Is it my body and my physical appearance? Like what's actually causing these feelings so that I can like see it for what it is instead of just like trying to bypass it. And part of it for me was like, how do I distill millennials of wisdom into keynote presentations? Okay. And I wasn't great at it at all in the beginning. Okay. But grew in that
I love that
skill.
truth. You're like, yeah, it gets ugly and then it gets better.
Oh, totally. Like I tell people this all the time. Like one of my first engagements was for a former All-American running back. And I wrote out my speech word for word, read it into a recorder, put that recorder in my pocket, strung headphones up through my suit jacket, left
No,
one
you
headphone
did not. No,
in
you
order to give the appearance that I forgot to take my headphones out. And I hit play on the recorder and I started to recite the recording.
you did not.
It gets worse.
Love
I
this.
speak a lot faster than I read. So I got off sync with the recording and I started to repeat sentences. It was so embarrassing. It was so, I can feel
This
the
is
energy of
amazing, though.
embarrassment from that. Like, that's how bad I was.
I
I have
think my like love
footage.
for you just grew like exponentially. That was very, very creative.
Yeah, I know, right? I thought I was gonna
Oh
cheat on the test. I
man.
got caught, Just and they were looking at me like, this, why is he saying the same thing? Like, and it wasn't like I wasn't saying it profound. It wasn't like I was like they say when the teacher wants you to remember something, they repeat it twice or multiple times. It wasn't
Yeah.
that. It was like a stumble repeat, and they were just looking at me like, "What is going on?" And
There was a
so
glitch in your matrix.
And so these things cause me great insecurity. You want to talk about feeling like an imposter? It was feeling like, man, why am I up here speaking when I can't even put together my thoughts in a way that like makes sense chronologically? Like maybe it makes sense within itself, but as a collective speech, it didn't make sense. I had a lot of stuff to say, but I didn't know in what way to say it that was the most helpful narrative. And so, they say that in the coaching industry, when you're aligned and not just coaching
Yeah.
because there's a market need, but when you're coaching from divine purpose, that you're always helping a former version of yourself. And so part of the way that I deal with this imposter syndrome is I started to recognize that that's where some of the feelings were coming from, was that I wasn't delivering a good enough speech for the audience because the struggle was, how do I distill all of this life wisdom that I have into a cohesive narrative for people? Okay.
Hmm.
The other thing for me is I stopped comparing people's specialties to the areas where I was weak, people's strengths to my weaknesses. Okay.
Wow.
So like in
That's
this,
powerful.
oh, totally. Yeah. So in this instance, like Magic Johnson, right? That's like, it's probably going to be the case where majority of the people at the conference are coming to hear him. Not coming to hear Daryll. And that's like, oh, insecurity. They don't even want to hear me. I'm just the guy on the lineup as they wait for Magic. And I can tell myself that story, and there's probably pieces of that that are true. And why am I there? Why am I there? It's a more empowering question. And so how I'm dealing with that imposter syndrome, because it came up multiple times. And I just said, you know what? I heard Magic Johnson speak before. That's where I had the privilege. And he's good and it's good. But the emotional the emotional depth, it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
But I got that. So I'm gonna do that, balls to the wall. And I'm not gonna be something I'm not. I'm not gonna start talking about crazy numbers because nobody cares about my numbers. I can talk about 6 and 7 figures and they're gonna be like, oh, that's it. So I'm not there to talk about that. I am there to talk about my keynote is vulnerability is the new currency. Oh, let's go.
Oh,
Let's get it. Vulnerability is
oh,
the new
that's
currency,
good. That's
right? Like
good.
we say this as a quote, like the more vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are. And it's like, it's actually true. And why? Because in order to be vulnerable, vulnerability means to be open. Okay. Some definitions will tell you to be open for damage. My definition is to be open for both pain and love to come through.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because when you're the most open and the most expressed, that's when you have the opportunity to experience the most pain. The people reject the real you, that hurts. But if they
Yes.
reject some, distorted view or limited view of you, you're like, well, they don't really know me. But what happens when they really do know you and they still don't like you? So vulnerability is to be fully open in that way, but it's also to be fully powerful in that way. I'm a bigger channel, I'm an open vessel, and
Yeah.
now I get to experience that. So vulnerability is the new currency because it is authenticity on display. And that is why there's a rise of the TikToks and all this stuff because people are in greater levels of vulnerability. And therefore, it is enabling us to have faster transactions, greater connections, like all the things. And so that's what I'm there to talk about. I'm not there to try to compete with him or anybody else. And that's where imposter syndrome comes from. It
Mm-hmm.
comes from comparison. How do I stop it? I stop comparing. I don't just affirm, and declaration and try to bypass it. I stop comparing. And I actually get to know my true strengths and live and rest in that.
You're so right. It's in the comparison. It's in the bypassing that we never learn to really lean into the depths of who we are.
Mm,
And you're right. It's really scary and painful when you put yourself out there as who you really are. But what I want to say to that is if you put yourself out there as who you really are and people aren't getting it, they're not your right people.
mhm,
You're trying to associate with and connect with and identify with an external life that maybe is misaligned for you as well because your people hear you, get you, see you, and
mm,
still might get nervous, right? Like even sometimes I get nervous around people that I'm so excited to know and to be around. And then I'm like, oh yeah, there's space enough for both of us to be brilliant. And
mhm,
what like
mhm.
we're here to be brilliant together and
Totally.
lift each other up for our weaknesses and help highlight each other's strength and radiance, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so it's about finding that community piece, but also it's about really connecting in with yourself and knowing. I love that you say that to know yourself, not bypass the places. And affirmations are
Yes.
amazing to help you find
Totally.
those pieces. But if you're not doing the deeper work, it's
Mhm.
never going to feel great. Yeah, there's so much. So I'm going to tell you a little story too about this. Like, just while I'm still processing what you said, like, my brain is turning. I don't want to, like, I'll keep talking so it's not just this dead silence for the audience. But that was so good. So there was this time actually that, and I guess my association of this is like putting myself back out on stage performing, which I've done a lot more business in life than performance, as people might know. But so when I went back on a stage for the first time performing a song that I had written that was deep within my pain, within my soul, right? It's so vulnerable. It's so frightening to put yourself out there in something that you're passionate about and that you love. And I was actually doing great, feeling good. And then I got nervous that, like, oh, maybe I'm not. I'm in the middle of singing. I'm thinking, oh, maybe I'm not doing as good as I think I'm doing. And in that moment, I tripped and fell over myself, not physically, but I started like having trouble breathing and not singing the song right and kind of messing up the words and the chords. We trip ourselves up by not leaning into that vulnerability and not just saying, it's okay for us to show up with where we are. Like in that first example where you were repeating yourself and you had done all this amazing work to like basically create, I guess, like a little teleprompter within your ear, like a playback system. I love that so much. You had to work hard on that, buddy. Like
Oh, dude, I
that
got
took
some
a
more
lot
stories too. That's not. I don't
of
even know if that's the worst
effort.
one. Oh yeah.
And that's the thing is like sometimes when we spend so much of our energy psyching ourselves out, like we could have just gone up there, said something from our heart, and even though it may not have been the most eloquent, it would have been the most impactful. And I think that that's what we can show up with as who we are as well. Like it's okay if we're a little bit messy. It's okay if we're just showing up. If you show up in your truth and in alignment to yourself, that's going to radiate in a way that's going to be so much more impactful to people.
Yes. Yes. Totally. Totally. And there's a whole journey I went on. I'm like, oh, I'm going to master the mechanics of speaking. Like I'm going to get better at silence, at pauses. I get better at vocal inflections and dynamic range. And I'm going to get better at using the PowerPoints, and I'm going to get better at, the hero's journey. And I'm going to get better at like all these things. And it was just like, I was trying to use mechanics to become a master, and mechanics will never make you a master at speaking. Only alignment will.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of what you had mentioned was like speaking from the heart. And I know people, and here's how I describe it to people. I believe that, I'll just say it this way. I believe that we access that information from the heart, but we actually articulate it with the mind. And it's just my belief. And typically people try to do it the other way around. Like they're like, what do I want to
Mm-hmm.
say? Let me go from head and let me think about it. And then I'll try to like drop into the heart when I deliver it. It's like, it's backwards. I feel like when you open the heart, and the reason why the preparation is important, and I don't just speak off the cuff, is because of what I mentioned about the distilling of millennia of information into a speech. Okay, when I speak off the cuff, I might say some good things. They might be some timely things. They might be vulnerable things. They might be things that resonate, but they're not the most potent message for me to share. When I put intention and I go, for me, it's like the difference between just making a meal and people coming over and enjoying it, and like learning people so much that you make the perfect meal for them.
Mm-hmm.
That's the craft for me.
That intention.
Like, oh, I
Yes.
know where they're at. I got millennia of wisdom to sort through. I'm going to put myself through a series of preparation to really get, this story and this example and this thing. And I'm just going to let it all go when I get up there. And it's going to be like, leap. And it's so awesome. It's so awesome.
That
Ah,
is amazing. That
yeah.
is so powerful. Ah, so, so good. We could go on forever and ever about all the different quantum leaps and the life journeys and the stories and everything. But it is so amazing to see the way that you've so naturally pivoted in areas of your life too, and not without the challenges, right? I mean, you spoke to that when we first started about how shutting yourself off to alignment, what that led to, and how you had to lose everything in order to find yourself again. And I think that it doesn't have to be so drastic in people's lives. It might be small, but these areas of openness and willingness to pivot and to be open to what the next chapter looks like. You've done that so beautifully, and you share that gift with others. Now you're also coaching others on how to find their message and their vision, right? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, for me, I kept saying that I wanted to change the world, right? Like, oh, I want to change the world, I want to change the world. And it came a point in my journey where I started to see two things. So there was a period of my journey where I noticed that the level of my impact was directly connected to my level of vulnerability. The more vulnerable I was, the more impact I would see. Okay.
Mm.
But not just short term in terms of like standing ovations or like, oh, that was a great message, but like long term of like people coming back a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, 4 years later. I've been doing it for a little bit long, but years later and being like, hey, I've still been implementing these things and here's what my life is looking like. So I started to see that correlation. Okay. In that, I still saw when I was the most vulnerable and I did my thing to the best of my expression, that there was some people that was like not resonating or not getting it or whatever. And it bothered me because I felt like there was so much more available for them. And while I was able to be okay with that, because I'm like, okay, I'm not there, like they're not my assignment or I'm not for them. I started to ask myself, well, who is for them? And in the doing of that, I awakened. This might not sound like an epiphany to people, but yeah, I'm just telling you, it was for me. I was like, oh, snaps, I actually can't change the world with just my story. I have to help other people who have a
I get it.
different
Yeah, I get. You're like,
I
what?
have I sound so bad, but like I'm telling you, I was like really trying to change the world. I'm just gonna share and share, and like and the world's gonna change. I'm making impact, and then it's like I can't actually do that by myself. Like with my own story, I have to empower other leaders who have great levels of fulfillment, which is important to me. Okay, like they have to. It's not just about like can you say sweet stuff. It's like can you actually help change lives? Can you make a difference? Can you resource and equip people, or can you just like throw out some tweetable statements? There's a big difference between impact and like I'm just speaking. When I had that awakening, I was like, oh man, well, how do I help other people? Okay. And then I started to look, well, what are the type of people I want to help? Oh man, I want to help people who are spiritually connected. I want to help people who have deep levels of vision for service. I want to help people who have proven that they can help somebody change their life or transform their reality. And man, how do I help them to get massive visibility? How do I help them to distill their millennias of wisdom into messages that shift people? Oh my gosh, I got chills when I said that. And
Mhm.
so I just opened that up and I was a little nervous because I was like, hey, I know how to do it for me, but how do I help someone else do what I do? And it took some time, it's the coaching journey, get a couple people, start helping them figure out how to actually unlock them and things like that. Everyone's got something that they're kind of a little scared to share, even if they say that they're not. And it's like working through all the things and like, oh man, what I learned is there was a piece of this for me in helping people where I help a lot of high achievers. Okay. And when I was an elite athlete, it was very hard for me to be truthful and honest with people because people's perceptions of me could potentially land me in the front page of the news.
Right.
And so what I learned is I'm able to hold space for a lot of high achievers because it's like, hey, you might share this with your coaching community and maybe they might think a little differently of you. But here, this is safe place for you to practice in the process and to refine that skill so that when you show up and speak, you can be safe in that vulnerability within yourself because you had a chance to explore within this community that I've curated. And so, man, that's what I began to do. And it was a beautiful thing to be able to help people do TEDx talks and gain visibility. I feel like every comment that they get, I somewhat played a part in that.
Mhm.
It's a beautiful thing to see them say, like, we all have these things that we try to communicate that we can't find the words for. But when we find the words for it, it is powerful. It is powerful.
Yes.
And so to see them like drop
Yes.
these statements and like this, like I remember it used to take them like 10 minutes to kind of say this thing that I helped them to say in 2 sentences. And it's like, ooh, let's go. See, look, like I love seeing that. You should hear me when I go watch my speakers do TEDx talks or do speaking engagements. I sound like a freaking kid at a baseball game. Like I'm just like, yeah, oh yeah, oh,
You're the proud dad on the
oh
sidelines.
man, oh my
Yes.
God, I'm like that. And it's so beautiful. And I believe that we are collectively restoring the world back to its original beauty.
I could not agree more with that final statement. And also, I love that you were talking about finding the words, as the PowerPoint for others, because when we're talking about high achievers, when we're talking about everybody, right? Everyone has an achievement in their life of a place that they want to reach, a goal, a vision. It's there inside of you, but how do you bring that out? How do you communicate that with others to create that impact? So I love that you are speaking and teaching
Yeah,
to that specific point for others.
totally. And the other piece of this that I think is important to mention is like there's a level of this expertise in this journey that I traveled that it's about alignment and customization.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an important distinction because there in my journey, there was a period where I was just trying to learn how do I book these engagements and stuff. And then it was just like, man, I don't want to be a road warrior. I have young children and I'm not just a speaker. You know,
Yeah.
I'm an author, I have a best-selling book. I feel like I'm called to write at least five more. I have investments. I have like I'm a serial entrepreneur, so I got other things I want to dabble in. Like I don't just want to be a speaker, but I love to speak. And so, how do I set up the systems in my business in a way that this is part of what I do, but not all of what I do? It's part of the expertise, right? And so, I think it's really important to give some people permission because I've been in a lot of entrepreneur spaces and I know there's a ton of people who won't speak more often because they think that now they have to go from being a coach to a speaker. You actually don't have to like make a hard shift. It's no different than just writing a book. It's just an expression of who you are. It's not all of who you are. And
Oh,
that's a
that's
really important
good.
piece. So people actually make that leap versus feeling like now they're changing its entire like career paths and stuff like that.
Again, it goes back to the subtleties that we're talking about, like those simple shifts, right? And really, a lot of it comes down to the mindset shift, the perception of how we're looking at things, the
Hmm.
perspective. And then
Hmm.
it opens the doorway. I love that you have all these other facets of your life that you're living within. And for you, it's really natural because it's all on the same, I like to say it's the same energetic, right? Like there's so many different things that I love to do, but really it's all the same energetic. It is
Hmm.
expression and it's
Absolutely.
just showing up in expression of who you are. And so you're helping people refine that and have given yourself permission to pivot along the way and see those journeys. And I think that's a powerful permission that you share with others and that everyone listening can give for themselves, right? So, oh my
Totally.
gosh, we could just go on and on and on and on. I
Like
know
a
this.
9 hour podcast.
Yeah, we're like, okay, that's good. Let's take a dinner break. But so to kind of full circle, what would you leave us with? If you could kind of
Hmm.
walk away and distill one thing that from your journey in your picture for maybe those listening who are trying to find that alignment for themselves and unsure, maybe it's in the subtleties. What would you say to them?
Two things. The first thing I would say is go back and listen to this episode with a notepad and listen for the things that create some resonance for you and become curious about why it resonated. Try to see if there is what we're describing as these shifts or these windows that can be doorways to new realities for you. And see if there is a step that you can take, whether that is, hey, I'm going to put something on my calendar. I'm going to have a conversation. I'm going to set a date where I'm going to really go internally and look in, or I'm going to do the thing that I know I've been putting off to do for a while because I'm recognizing how I'm shutting off a part of what I'm supposed to be receiving as well in life. Do that.
Mm-hmm.
Second thing I would say is I would sort of cast a net. Okay. And this is just what's on my heart to say. I feel like there's a lot of people sitting on solutions
Mm-hmm.
and they won't share it because of the fear of speaking. They won't share it because of the fear of rejection. And I just want to cast the net and be like, A, I can help, and B, you should share. Because if we are sitting on solutions, then there's no, then that is the reason why our world is sitting in struggle. And maybe we could struggle less if leaders like you would share more. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love those shares. I love that wisdom so much. It's taking the notes of what lights you up, whether it's in this podcast, whether it's in looking at the things in your life that you're doing that is surrounded you by, the things that you dream about, taking notes of what lights you up so that you can begin to put the picture together of what it is that's calling that if you can't see it already in your mind. And then getting off your seat of solutions and showing up. That is so good. That is so good. Oh, it is such an honor. I'm so grateful for you to share this today in this community, all of your wisdom, your heart, your light. And Everybody check out the show notes. I'm going to have all the different ways that you can connect with Daryll and hear his talks, connect with his books, connect with his programs. He is such a light in this world, and I know you will love him as much as I've come to love and find endearment in our friendship. It's just so beautiful that our paths crossed and that we met in the time and space, but no surprise there, right? We're always
Mm.
guided to the places, the time, and the people. Thank you,
Totally.
my dear friend. It is such an honor to have you here.
Blessings.